And now, the Deeper Thinking podcast, where philosophy, psychology, and power collide.
Welcome to the Deeper Thinking podcast. Some people feel everything before the world names it, before others even notice. There are those who flinch at a sudden sound, who taste the sorrow behind a smile, who enter a room and register the temperature of tension, the tilt of light, the breath between words. They are often misunderstood, called too much, too quiet, too fragile. But what if they are not weak? What if they are built to listen in frequencies most have forgotten how to hear? Byung-Chul Han speaks of a world burning out on brightness, collapsing under its own noise. But there are still those who refuse to numb. They stay open. They register. They feel. Let's dive in. The café was full, but not loud, at least not to most. Conversations hummed beneath clinking cups and the soft churn of milk being steamed. To her, though, the air felt thick, not with noise exactly, but with edges. A chair scraped too sharply against tile. Someone's laughter, 3 tables away, split like glass. The lighting flickered just enough to feel wrong, cool-toned, pulsing faintly, like it was synced to something she couldn't see. Her throat tightened, then loosened. No one else seemed to notice. She shifted in her seat. The tag of her shirt scratched at the base of her neck, suddenly unbearable. The espresso in front of her had a bitterness that startled, even though she'd ordered the same thing every day that week. The metal spoon beside it felt cold in a way that wasn't just temperature, it was invasive. Across the room, a toddler cried, then stopped abruptly. Her chest held the residue of the sound longer than it lasted. None of this was dramatic. It wasn't a meltdown, a panic attack, or anything visible enough to draw concern. Her breathing remained steady. Her posture didn't betray her. She even smiled when the server passed by. But beneath that quiet, her nervous system was ablaze, cataloguing, adjusting, responding. This wasn't a matter of being moody or fussy. It was a full-body calculus running in real time, with no off switch. Later, someone might say, "You seem tired," and she would nod, unwilling or unable to explain the tax of simply existing in that room, that it wasn't just the social interaction or the lighting or the background noise, but the layering of it all, the accumulation, the way every element had to be processed, felt, and made sense of before being stored or discarded. There are people like this, people for whom the world arrives not in headlines, but in signals. They notice the way a sentence lands differently than it's spoken, the pause that means more than the words. They sense when something in the atmosphere shifts, when a person turns away a beat too soon, or the energy in a group sours before anyone names it. And while others move fluidly through their day, these people adjust constantly, not because they want to, because they must, because their bodies register what others miss. Because sensitivity isn't chosen, it's a way of being the world does not always make room for. But it exists, quietly, perceptively still. The first time the word was given to her, sensitive, it arrived not as insult, but as diagnosis. A therapist said it softly, like offering a solution. She had cried during a routine medical procedure, a reaction deemed excessive. Overreaction, they called it. She didn't argue. But something about that label, highly sensitive person, lingered, not just as a description, but as a key. At first, it sounded like a softness she didn't want. Something flimsy, frayed, unshielded. But when she searched, the description echoed back too precisely to ignore. People who processed things deeply. People who noticed subtleties others missed. People who felt not just more, but differently, who carried the weight of a moment long after it had passed. She remembered being small and watching light move across the floor, feeling that it meant something. She remembered crowds, how they pressed in without touching her. Music that made her cry before she knew what the lyrics meant. The way her body always seemed to speak first. But still, was that really a trait or just a sensitivity as it's always been understood? A flaw to be managed, soothed, outgrown? The term had been used before, of course, by psychologists, poets, spiritual teachers. But here it was precise. Sensory processing sensitivity. A nervous system that's wired to notice, to absorb, to respond, not neuroticism, not shyness. Not weakness, just a different kind of filter, a system with less gating, more signal. The research offered scaffolding, Elaine Aron's work, the scale of 27 questions, the data, the patterns, the evolutionary logic. 30% of the population, they said, Not rare, just hidden, overlooked, misunderstood. But even with science behind it, saying the words aloud felt risky. There was no neutral way to declare yourself highly sensitive. People heard fragility, delicacy, drama, as if to be sensitive meant being perpetually on the verge. And yet, that wasn't the truth of it. The truth was in the calibration, the responsiveness, the depth. Sensitivity, she began to realize, wasn't something that made her collapse. It was something that made her track patterns, energies, changes. It was the reason she saw things coming before others did. The reason she couldn't feel something that had passed. The reason she sometimes needed silence, not to escape the world, but to metabolize it. And so the words stayed, not as apology, not as defense, but as recognition, not a wound, a way. Sensitivity, as the culture often imagines it, is flimsy, emotional, weak. But the deeper research, what lives beneath pop psychology and personality quizzes, reveals something else entirely. Sensitivity, in its truest form, is less about reactivity and more about depth of processing. It's not that sensitive people feel more, though often they do, but that they register more before they feel anything at all. This distinction matters because for too long, the trait has been confused with neurosis, anxiety, shyness, or social inhibition. It's been folded into stereotypes of fragility, particularly feminine fragility. But the psychometric separation is clear. Highly sensitive people are not necessarily introverts, nor are they necessarily anxious. What defines them is cognitive style, a slowness not of intellect but of deliberation, a tendency to pause not because they fear response but because they're still processing the signal beneath the noise. Elaine Aron's foundational work was the first to systematically tease these differences apart. The highly sensitive person scale wasn't designed to diagnose, but to articulate something previously invisible. The questions weren't clinical, they were experiential. Do you notice subtleties in your environment? Do other people's moods affect you? Do you need time alone after socializing, even if you enjoyed it? Each one pointing toward a nervous system that operates at a different resolution. The data reinforced the nuance. Roughly 30% of people scored high on the scale. A minority, but not a rarity. And importantly, the trait showed up across cultures, genders, and temperaments, including a significant number of extroverts. Sensitivity wasn't about hiding, it was about processing, and doing so thoroughly, sometimes exhaustively. This difference often gets misread because it isn't always visible. Sensitive people often pass as functional, even unremarkable in daily life. They speak calmly, they smile, they show up. What's missed is what's happening underneath. The inner architecture running behind the scenes, a kind of quiet labour of attention and interpretation that never fully stops. The term for this, sensory processing sensitivity, captures something crucial. Not sensitivity as emotion, but as perceptual style, the way a body listens before responding, the way a mind moves sideways before it speaks. The way silence isn't empty, but full of sorting, indexing, weighing. And in this light, sensitivity begins to look less like a liability and more like a kind of precision, not softness, not fragility, but depth. Discerning, deliberate, and profoundly attuned, not a problem to fix, a pattern to understand. Empathy is often spoken of as kindness, as softness, as a virtue of temperament. But within the sensitive system, empathy is something different. Less a choice, more an inevitability. It happens before intention, before judgment, before consent. It is not a moral act, it is neurological. Studies show that in highly sensitive people, regions of the brain associated with empathy, like the precuneus, the insula, the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, light up more vividly, more frequently. Not only in response to pain or joy, but in response to subtleties. The micro-shifts in expression, the unfinished gesture, the emotional residue of a room. The sensitive system doesn't just recognize emotion, it simulates it. Mirror neurons fire not in sympathy, but in reflection. Their bodies become what they witness, often before their minds can frame it. This can look like tenderness, but it is not always gentle. It can be overwhelming, invasive, disorienting. Imagine watching someone flinch and feeling your own muscles tense. Noticing someone's sadness and your chest tightens without instruction. Sitting beside someone silent and suddenly carrying a grief you did not earn. Emotion in this framework is not disruptive to thought. It is a form of thought. Antonio Damasio's research confirmed what many sensitive people have always known intuitively. Feelings are cognitive. They help prioritize, integrate, decide. They are not the opposite of reason. They are its foundation. And yet, in most cultural settings, emotion is discounted, labeled irrational, messy, inconvenient, especially when it arrives quietly through tone, gesture, silence. This is what philosopher Miranda Fricker calls epistemic injustice, when someone's way of knowing is dismissed because it doesn't align with dominant forms of knowledge. Sensitive people encounter this often. They say something feels off and are told they're imagining it. They pick up tension in a group and are labelled dramatic. They withdraw from situations others find normal and are seen as unstable, overreactive. But what if they're not reacting at all? What if they're registering? What if they're simply noticing, sooner, deeper, more completely? To be empathic in this way is to carry more than your own emotional weight. It is to move through the world as an antenna, picking up signals others miss, translating them, often wordlessly, carrying them sometimes unwillingly, not because you choose to feel, but because your system was never built not to. This is not fragility, it's fluency, and it costs something, but it offers something too. A way of knowing the world not only as it appears, but as it vibrates, beneath language, beneath performance, beneath denial. In nature, not every member of a species is built to rush forward. Some hold back, not from fear, but from design. They observe, scan, wait. These are not the slow or the weak. They are the specialists, the pattern readers, the early warners. In evolutionary terms, their role is survival, not through force but through foresight. Max Wolf's simulation models made this clear. His research showed that in complex environments where food varies in quality, where threats shift shape, organisms benefit from differing strategies. Some act quickly, efficiently, others pause, gather more data before making a move. Over time, those who notice subtleties, who sense changes early, provide the group with a kind of collective intelligence, but only if they remain a minority. If everyone is cautious, the system stagnates. If no one is cautious, it collapses. Highly sensitive people embody this minority strategy. They are not accidents of personality. They are cognitive outliers shaped by evolutionary pressures. Their attentiveness, their reactivity, their deep processing, these are not malfunctions, they are adaptations. Evidence of a species making room for multiple ways of surviving. This trait is visible beyond humans. Sensitive dogs, cats, horses, creatures who startle sooner, hesitate longer, observe more carefully. Even among birds and insects, this behavioral diversity exists. It is not pathology. It is ecological diversity at work. But in human culture, especially modern Western culture, the sensitive type often collides with the dominant values: speed, productivity, decisiveness, output. The one who waits is seen as hesitant. The one who watches is seen as passive. The one who feels is seen as fragile. Our systems reward the fast, the loud, the certain. And yet, what happens when the environment becomes unstable? When the obvious solutions fail? When nuance is required, when complexity must be felt before it can be fixed? In those moments, sensitivity stops being excess. It becomes intelligence, the kind that doesn't always raise its hand first, the kind that senses before it knows and knows before it speaks. The sensitive person may not be the leader in every room, but they are the one who notices the ripple before the wave, the one who sees the storm in the shift of wind. The one who asks a different kind of question, not how do we move faster, but what are we missing by moving so fast? And sometimes that question changes everything. The modern world is calibrated for acceleration. Work faster, scroll longer, respond immediately. There is little room for delay, less for depth, and almost none for quiet. In this landscape, sensitivity becomes not only misunderstood, but actively unwelcome. The loudness is not just auditory, it's structural. Cities hum with constant motion, notifications splinter attention, open-plan offices erase privacy, algorithms reward outrage over nuance. Everything is designed to be consumed quickly, felt briefly, discarded easily. For those who process slowly, feel deeply, or require silence to think clearly, this is not just overwhelming, it is alienating. Byung-Chul Han calls it the society of transparency, where reflection is replaced by exposure and contemplation by productivity. In such a world, the sensitive are not just overlooked, they are inconvenient. Their needs interrupt the flow. Their boundaries disrupt the grind. Their silence unsettles the performative chatter of optimization. This isn't simply a matter of preference, it's a matter of misfit. Sensitive people are not failing to adapt, they are revealing where the system itself is failing. They are, in many ways, the canaries in the cultural coal mine, showing the costs of speed, of extraction, of sensory saturation long before others notice the toll. And yet when they speak of their experience, they are often met with skepticism. Everyone's stressed. You just need to toughen up. It's not that loud. But sensitivity isn't about being unable to cope. It's about being built to register. When the noise rises, they don't just hear it, they track it, carry it, absorb it. Their systems don't filter it out, and so they must find other ways to survive. For some, this means withdrawal, leaving social spaces, avoiding crowds, wearing headphones on planes, sunglasses indoors. Others try to match the pace until their bodies rebel. Migraines, fatigue, burnout that arrives with no warning or too much of it. And then there are those who bend, quietly designing lives around their needs without ever naming them aloud. But what all of them share is this: they are not reacting irrationally to a normal world. They are responding rationally to a world that is too much, too fast, too bright, too loud. They are evidence of the cost borne not only by them, but eventually by everyone. Sensitivity in this context is not fragility, it is resistance, a refusal to numb, a refusal to adapt to what should never have become normal, a refusal still to stop noticing. In most rooms, their work goes unnoticed, not the tasks they complete, but the labour they perform without being asked, the glance that softens tension, the silence that absorbs discomfort, the instinct to step back so someone else can speak, even if no one thanks them for it. Sensitive people are often doing invisible things, buffering, interpreting, attuning, holding the emotional scaffolding in place. It begins before language. In childhood, many sensitive people learn to scan their environment for signs of instability, tone, posture, breath. They learn that safety doesn't always announce itself, but can be predicted if you know where to look. And so they become readers of people, of rooms, of atmospheres, not because they want to manage others, but because their bodies compel them to. Over time, this becomes a kind of second shift. They walk into meetings already sensing the tension beneath politeness. They know when a conflict is brewing before it surfaces. They craft emails with invisible emotional cushioning. They anticipate needs. They remember preferences. They de-escalate without fanfare. None of this appears on performance reviews, but it's essential. The group runs smoother because they are there. Sociologist Ali Hochschild called this emotional labour, the effort required to manage one's own emotions and the emotions of others, often without compensation. Sensitive people often perform this labour not just outwardly but internally. They preempt conflict before it starts. They absorb energy that might otherwise spill. They regulate rooms, and because they do it so fluidly, no one sees the toll it takes. It's not always noble. Sometimes it's exhausting. Sometimes they're resented for being too much, even as they hold the weight others won't name. Sometimes they don't even realise what they're doing until they burn out. It's hard to name something you've been doing your whole life just to stay connected, just to feel safe. But once recognised, this labour takes on shape and meaning. It is not weakness. It is not codependency. It is work, precise, effective and essential. In families, in teams, in partnerships, in classrooms, the sensitive person is rarely the loudest, rarely the most visible, but they are often the one who ensures things don't fall apart. They won't always be thanked. But if they stopped doing what they do, people would feel the difference. That subtle tension would return. The unspoken would remain unspoken. The pulse of the room would falter. They aren't the centre. They're the undercurrent, the attunement, the thing holding everything together, quietly. Eventually, the sensitive person begins to question the story they've been handed, that they're too much, too delicate, too slow, that their needs are strange, their instincts inconvenient. They start to wonder, what if the problem isn't who they are, but how they've been framed? What if their responses are not excesses, but signals? This is the beginning of reclamation. It often arrives slowly, a moment of fatigue that isn't just tiredness, but a boundary crossed too many times, a job that drains in ways it shouldn't, a relationship where they are always the emotional buffer. These moments accumulate until the story breaks open, And into that opening comes something else: clarity. They start to see their choices differently. The times they turned down the job that required endless travel, the decision to live alone, the refusal to socialize every weekend, things once labeled as avoidance now appear as wisdom, subconscious acts of preservation. Their life wasn't a retreat from the world, it was a redesign around their nervous system. This reframing is not just emotional, it is architectural. They begin to build lives that work. That factor in sensory thresholds, emotional capacity, cognitive load. They change the lighting in their home, choose fabric by feel, cancel when the energy isn't right. They no longer wait for exhaustion to justify saying no. They say no as a form of design. And it isn't always easy. There is grief here too, the grief of misrecognition, of years lived in translation, of friendships lost to misunderstanding, of times they forced themselves to perform normal. But in that grief is a kind of power, not loud, not theatrical, but steady, rooted. They learn that strength doesn't always look like resilience. Sometimes it looks like refusal, like creating a morning routine no one else understands, like leaving the party early without apology, like planning for recovery time before the thing has even happened. They are not being difficult, they are being accurate. And maybe for the first time they stop asking how to become less sensitive. They begin to ask how to live more sensitively, with intention, with integrity, with care, not in defense, in design. Because this trait, once seen clearly, doesn't have to be managed. It can be shaped, honored, built into. And once that shift happens, once the story changes, the life that follows begins to look less like survival and more like something quietly radical, something whole. There is a moment, always quiet, often small, when everything begins to settle. The world hasn't changed, the lights still buzz, the air still hums, but something in the sensitive person has shifted, not hardened, not armoured, just clarified. They know now that their nervous system isn't broken, that their way of noticing, of carrying, of sensing is not a disorder, but a design. They no longer feel the need to explain away their boundaries. They don't ask for permission to leave early, to say no to retreat. They've stopped apologising for needing what they need. And in that space, something opens. The sensitivity remains. The overwhelm still comes. But now it is met with gentleness, not shame, with structure, with foresight. They build silence into their days like others schedule meetings. They choose softness without guilt. They sense the edge approaching and step back, not because they are afraid, but because they understand the cost of crossing it. And others begin to feel it too, the steadiness, the clarity, the sense that here is someone who moves differently, not slower but deeper, someone who notices what goes unspoken, who hears the thing behind the thing, who sees not just what is, but what is becoming. They are not angels, they are not fragile, they are not perfect empaths floating through the world unscathed. They are often tired, private, specific. But they are also attuned, deliberate, and, when allowed to be themselves, profoundly impactful. What they carry cannot always be measured, but it can be felt. In the way they adjust the room without announcing it, in the pause they hold when no one else knows what to say, in the question they ask that turns the conversation. This is not the end of the story. Sensitivity does not resolve. It echoes, it recurs, it shapes, it requires tending over and over again. But now it is not carried as weight, it is held as truth. And so the light still shifts, the voices still rise, the air still thickens, but somewhere in that complexity they remain, listening, adjusting, alive to the pulse beneath it all. Not numbing, not rushing, not hiding, just noticing. Until next time.
This episode of the Deeper Thinking podcast was written, produced and researched by Benjamin James. It was read by Holly, a digital narrator. For further reading, resources and a chance to support the show, visit the episode webpage, where you'll find book recommendations, key topics to explore, and a way to buy me a coffee. And if you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving a review on your preferred platform.